Welcome to my YouTube video or my podcast. Today I'm meeting with a friend, colleague, Robert Jackman. By now you should know him very well. We've done probably about 4 or 5 discussions already, all of them fascinating, deep, and some even mind-bending. So I'm really excited about this one because today we're going to talk about boundaries and how to set them and what are the challenges around setting them. But first, Bob, tell my viewers and listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, I appreciate that, Ross. It's great for me to be here with you today. I'm Robert Jackman. I'm a psychotherapist, author of 5 books, 5 self-help books. Today, we're going to be talking about my latest adventure in boundaries. Boundaries is a big topic. A lot of people don't understand boundaries. And if you're in therapy, therapists might be talking to you about boundaries, and you might be a little confused what he or she means by it. So today I want to talk a little bit about that, but more specifically, I'd like to talk about why it's sometimes hard for codependents to set boundaries, why it's hard for those who have experienced trauma to
Sure.
set boundaries. Because that's sort of this hidden, let's say, detriment to be able to defend ourselves.
Right.
Because if we grew up in a dysfunctional home of some kind, we learn to change ourselves to fit into that environment. And a lot of times we learn to make ourselves smaller to fit into that world. And
Yeah.
because of that, it takes our voice. We're either told, don't say anything, or if we do try to defend ourselves, we're shut down, we're ridiculed, we're doubted. They want us to explain or defend our boundaries. That's why a lot of people learn at a young age, is how they learn at a young age to not set boundaries and to be silent.
I look at boundaries as a reflection of ourselves. It is who we are, what we think we're worth, what we think other people think we're worth, and how we manage ourselves in an environment. And if we want something and we ask for it, we find people that are willing to accommodate that within reason. And if we don't want something or something is kind of adversive, punishing, consequential, frightening, we set boundaries in order to protect ourselves. And if we are healthy, which I call self-love abundant, our boundary systems, our boundary rules tend to be healthy and clear and solid. But if we are not in using self-love deficient or codependent, they represent ourself and our problems and our weaknesses. What are your thoughts about someone's boundaries or their ability to set them,
Mhm.
to maintain them, reflective of their mental health?
Well, it's completely reflective of the wounding that that person carries. What I write in the book, when we've experienced trauma, we may begin to make up stories about ourselves and our world that are sifted through a cloudy filter. The false narrative. People begin to look through this false narrative of themselves and their world and make up stories that they're not worthy to set
Right,
boundaries. And so a lot of people don't even try. Or if
right.
they try once and they're shot down, they don't try again.
And the connection to trauma, the way I see it with my adult clients, and which are mostly folks that are codependent or self-love deficient, you can trace it back to the early trauma they had during the attachment period of their life or their developmental period where they're supposed to be unconditionally loved, respected, cared for, but they're not because, they didn't choose their parents. One's probably a narcissist and one probably is a codependent. And they learned to be small, diminutive, moldable, transparent. They learn that boundaries are dangerous if that is put out there for someone who has more power and who is
Mhm.
sensitive, who is reactive, who
Mhm.
is prone to a narcissistic injury. So the trauma of our childhood reflects our ability to understand and implement boundaries in our adulthood, which is, I know, right up the alley that you wanted to speak about today.
It certainly is. You have that aspect of it, but you also have what I call inherited boundaries, which
Hmm.
are the boundaries we see our parents or caregivers using.
Okay.
And then we adapt those. And so often, many of those are what I call defensive boundaries. They're walls of boundaries, or they're passive aggressive boundaries, or they're angry boundaries. A lot of dysfunctional boundaries, essentially, we learn through this inherited boundary system. We have what we are interpreting and how we're shutting down, like you say, or we're watching our parents or caregivers. Oh,
Right.
well, this is how they do it. Most of the time, we're really not learning healthy boundaries.
It's interesting that the term learning has this connotation of like watching, observing, and adapting something to your life in order to make it easier, make you more successful. But if you come from an unhealthy family, say an alcoholic or narcissistic parent and a co-alcoholic or a codependent parent, you're not only learning, watching, being taught, but you're experiencing the absence of respect for you as a person, your own volition, your own attempts to be yourself, to strike a balance of building an identity and fitting in with your family. If that is squashed, if that is overwhelmed, the attempts to build a sense of self that kind of is the engine for a boundary is impacted. And so whatever boundaries you try don't work. And for some of my clients as adults, they just gave up. They just see themselves as invisible.
Mhm.
And the solution is to connect it to the trauma, go backwards, and help them recapture the zeal and the motivation to find themselves in not only the relationships, but the boundaries that they set and belief that it can be and will be acknowledged and respected.
Yeah, and what you're talking about a lot there, Ross, is intergenerational trauma and how we're just picking this up and we're carrying it forward because it's
Right,
normalized in our family system. And we learn how to be silent. We learn how to not set boundaries, to not defend
right,
ourselves. And then we just keep on recreating these dysfunctional relationships because we think it's normal, because it's all we know. This repetition compulsion that it really robs us, I think. And like what you were saying, it is about going back and understanding that there is an intact, authentic self that's
right,
there that genuinely wants to set boundaries and defend oneself. It's removing all of these false narrative barriers
right.
of how we were told, no, you can't say that. You have to be this way. You don't have needs. I'm not going to recognize your needs. I'm not going to respect your needs, that sort of thing.
I want to give the inverse of what you're saying, which is the same thing you're saying. This will make sense in a second.
Yeah.
So when you talk about a false narrative, you're not good at this. You should not talk. You should listen. You're not smart enough. What happens through that process is we create our own narratives. I am not smart enough. I should not comment.
Mhm.
I am going to make a mistake. I am rude when I try to talk. And to me, and as a therapist and as a survivor of a dysfunctional family, that's the slippery slope when it gets difficult. When you start, as you said, you are kind of molded by these forces of dysfunction to
Mhm.
adopt these false narratives. And when they become your own, and by the time you get into therapy with someone like you or me or anyone else, is you're repeating all of these beliefs about yourself and you're identifying them as who you are and what you believe.
It's confusing because people feel that it's baked in, that
Exactly.
that's who they are. And you're right, they exclaim, "This is who I am. I am."
It's a form of gaslighting, actually, not classic gaslighting, but
No.
they were made to believe over time that they are unworthy of this or too much of this or too little bit of that. And over time, they adopted the belief system as their own and without the memory of the connection that it came from other people or other sources. how do you approach that as a therapist working with clients who either have the narrative as you described or the narrative as I described, which is just the inverse
Yeah,
side?
right. I take them through the work of my first book, Healing Your Lost Inner Child, where we're looking at that how the wounding shows up, how the inner
Right,
child wounding shows up, and how, which is basically how most of us learned how to defend ourselves with by shutting down, getting loud, trying to be invisible,
right,
learning to be passive aggressive. So
right,
all those things we did to try to feel emotionally safe in our childhood families.
right,
And so that really is the impasse. What happens is with these codependent behaviors, everything that I was mentioning, what happens is without strong boundaries, that's why they keep on perpetuating
right,
because the person is like, well, this is what I do, this is how I interact with the world. But and I was one of them that I kept on doing all these codependent behaviors, but I didn't understand why my relationships were all torn up and why I didn't feel satisfied. And it was because I was giving so much power away because I felt, okay, I have to give to this person for them to like me.
right,
I have to be selfless.
right,
And so I didn't have a strong boundary system. There are two things that I teach for a lot of folks it's really hard to get to is understanding respect and reciprocity. So those are absolutely necessary for a strong boundary system. And folks who have a trauma history or codependent backgrounds, it's really hard for them to recognize, does this person respect me?
right,
Is the relationship reciprocal? Is there an exchange? Is there a back and forth? Because
right,
they're so used to just a lot of times just giving up so much power.
right. I'd like to add is to evaluate if the partner capacity to learn, to adapt to our clients' changes and growth and discoveries, help them also understand there is a very, very strong, powerful person in this system who has a vested interest in to keep you from making progress.
That's
And
right.
because they have a personality disorder, they're probably not going to change. And that's when it gets dicey.
Exactly. And I have a section, dealing with boundaries with manipulators and narcissists. And before that section, I have a word of caution. An entire page is a word of caution about setting boundaries with manipulators and narcissists, because a
Right,
lot of times the situation can get worse. And then the narcissist then, has that rage against us to squash us, push us down, to make us small again.
yeah,
Because in reality, boundaries are the invitation that we go to someone else and say, this is a need I have. So boundaries are needs. This is a
right,
need I have. And it's the invitation to ask the other person, can you join me in this? So boundaries are very connective and joining. But what it requires is the other person to change in some way.
right. I did this video. The title of the video said, Boundaries on Narcissists Don't Work. And that
Right.
title was all about what I said. But I
Right.
basically said, if you are in a relationship with a pathological narcissist, someone with a personality disorder, boundaries usually don't work. Therefore, you have to learn another type of boundary. And I introduced them to like behavioral and learning theory that you can set limits, apply
Mhm.
consequences. And if you can do that consistently, it's the probably the most effective way of setting a boundary with a narcissist.
It is about consistency.
Mhm,
And it is about us defending ourselves and our needs. Boundaries, what I call opening boundaries,
mhm,
are I'd really like us to, I'm feeling lonely and I'd like us to have more time together. That's
right,
the opening boundary. That's what I call a request. But if I'm asking of that repeatedly and nothing's happening, then that's when we add a consequence. So I'm feeling lonely. I really miss you. If this continues, I don't know if this relationship is good for me. It's like, but we don't always have to have consequences. But with folks who are not respectful, who are not reciprocal, that's when we need to bring that in.
if we look just at plain old behavior theory, learning theory, consequences drive boundaries. For example, let's say you're in a healthy relationship and the person makes you Brussels sprouts. You thought you told him you didn't like them and
Right.
he forgot. And you remind him, oh, sweetheart, I don't like Brussels sprouts. And you say, oh, I'm sorry, it's okay. And then the next meal he makes you asparagus. And you just smile. Just say, this is delicious. Well, that's consequence. The consequence of following a boundary is
Hmm.
reinforced with a smile, a gesture.
Hmm.
And when we have partners that want to parallel our mental health or want to join us in getting healthier,
Hmm.
the boundary of us enjoying and appreciating it is seen and responded to. But when we're with someone who battles it or feels
Right.
somehow antagonized by it
Right.
or belittled or injured by it, that's when we look at the other type of consequences I was talking about. And we depend not on insight and
Right.
but more of them realizing that if we can consistently apply a consequence, there is probably at least a 50% chance there might be some change, but not much. And that's the challenge of doing our work with someone like you, myself, and others, and understanding the limitations of the people and the environment.
Seeing them accurately, but when we're not healed, when we're wounded, we're looking through a wounded lens.
Yes,
As
yes,
we heal, we start to look through a healed lens and we begin to see others wounding. And so you're right, it is an education in that part. And really what you're talking about is the honoring of our partners, of our friends, honoring us and us acknowledging, thank you for honoring me. Thank you for listening to me. I feel seen by you.
and that's a boundary. Boundaries are not just don't do that, it makes me upset.
Right.
People that want to be in our life, that love, respect, care, trust, and want to protect us in some
Yeah.
way, they respond to the pleasure reaction. And that tells them they're doing something right. In the best case scenario is where we should strive for in relationships. But if we come from trauma backgrounds and do our work in therapy and then get into a healthy relationship with someone who parallels in some degree our mental health and wants to keep moving forward, sometimes we have to describe and explain what we want. And if we come from an environment where we didn't learn it, or we learned that if we did it, there would be a consequence.
What I say is boundaries are needs expressed.
Yes.
So a
And
need could be don't do this anymore, or a need could be I really want this, like what you're saying. It's then helping folks say and be okay with your needs are valid. They're real.
right,
It's what you're feeling. This is a part of you. So it's that self-honoring and bringing that forward. So if folks are confused about boundaries, just check in with your gut reaction to something because your gut reaction is a great barometer of if this is a good thing or not for you. And see if you can then apply a feeling word to that gut reaction. So I'm feeling upset. Why are
right.
you feeling upset? Well, I feel upset because this person always yells at me. That's the construction of a
Mhm.
boundary statement. First, checking in with your gut. What does this feel like? Apply a feeling word and then construct it what it's about.
And are you suggesting to do this out loud with the partner that you're interacting with? Or is this more reflective for yourself to understand?
I think it's both. I think when
Okay.
we're first learning about boundaries, it's really scary to make those declarations for some folks. And so it's for sometimes it's about sitting with it and then getting kind of rolling those words around and
Right,
then say, okay, I want to take a chance and I want to tell this person this is what's going on with me. Of course, we have to evaluate safety and what the
right,
relationship is like and stuff. But then once we put it out there, that's when we're looking for respect and reciprocity.
right.
So we're looking for that honoring that you mentioned before.
Boundaries are a reflection of self. I
Hmm.
am a good person. I am smart. I am honest. I am
Hmm.
honorable, except, and if you have those beliefs, those self-narratives, then setting a boundary is easier because you believe you deserve it. A person in the relationship senses not only the boundary, but the person behind it. Sometimes you set a boundary, the person's not going to be happy. They
Hmm.
might be embarrassed. They might disagree. That's okay. That's the nature of relationships. That's
That's how
learning.
we grow in relationships.
Yes, yes.
Because if I don't tell you what my needs are, you don't know. And some people do some testing behaviors. Like if you really loved me, you would already know what I need.
Magical thinking. Yeah,
And that's just not fair to
yeah.
anyone. We need to put our needs out there so the other person isn't mind reading.
And that is what people like you, me, and other therapists is. We have to introduce the importance of communication and understanding, what is it, what are boundaries, what
Hmm.
is in all the mechanics, and then help our clients build not only the resources, but the emotional abilities, the skills, the self-esteem,
Hmm.
belief in self that they deserve to be respected and listened to.
It's what I say, it's a pathway to our emotional freedom. When we set boundaries and when we have boundaries in our toolkit, they're always with us. So it's not like I'm putting up boundaries and walls all the time to
Right.
protect myself, but I have them if I need them. And
Yeah.
it's really hard for us to go into codependent behaviors or trauma wounding behaviors
Yeah.
if we're setting boundaries, because boundaries create a sense of personal safety in our
Yeah.
relationship.
It also, a boundary can create a lack of personal safety if set with a person who is threatened by them, who
Mhm.
has systematically put into your mind that you are not worthy of the boundary or that boundary is not fair. We have to help our clients understand that this countervailing force, this resistance, this pushback is not a reflection of them,
Right.
but the fact that they're in a relationship with someone who is threatened by what is normally, embraced as a healthy, growing relationship experience.
If you set a boundary and the other person says that boundary is ridiculous, that is your huge red flag warning that this is not a respectful relationship. Nothing
And
is wrong with your boundary. It's that the other person doesn't like it and they want things to go back to the before time.
and if you use the simple concept, if you set a boundary and someone says it's ridiculous, they're
Hmm.
pretty much saying what they think about you and what the version of you as a healthy, proactively courageous,
Hmm.
risk-taking,
Right.
new boundary using person. And this kind of shifts the discussion, but I sometimes have to help my clients understand that when they think that they shouldn't set a boundary and that they're not worthy of it, that
Mhm.
they'll upset someone, that they're not smart enough, they're being rude. What I try to do is I try to connect the thought to a person in the recent past or the past. It's
Mhm.
called, I think I did a YouTube video on this, disidentifying the voices. Is okay, so I'm dumb. I shouldn't get into this conversation
Mhm.
about
Mhm.
politics. I shouldn't tell someone I'm not interested because I'm self-centered. we can just slow our clients down and kind of have them identify the statements that they say about themselves that counteract their boundaries, and they can go, oh, that's right. My husband or my partner used to say that, or my dad used to say that all the time.
Yeah.
And we can connect that counterproductive thought process to what other people have said. Then we get to see that their thinking has been formed by people. And then it becomes easier, at least to grow
Yeah.
and to overcome it, because you realize someone got into your head and put these ideas. And that to me is very rewarding work I do with some of my
Oh,
clients.
it's huge. Yeah, and that's where, this other person is living rent free in your head,
Hmm.
blocking your ability to set boundaries because of all this like chatter that is not real. It's the
Right.
other person's stuff that they projected onto us for whatever reason, and we took it in.
If we blame ourselves, that's exactly what someone who is pathologically narcissistic would want us. We blame ourselves. We
Yep.
believe we're not smart enough.
Right.
That's gaslighting.
Yeah.
You have been manipulated to believe there's something wrong with you, or you
That's where
have,
they want us.
yeah, and then we're screwed.
Right.
And so if we can understand that we are a victim of gaslighting and now we perpetrate it against ourselves, we can then kind of move it through and forward for the person to understand not only all the wonderful stuff we can teach them about boundaries,
Mm.
but the ramifications of being in a relationship with someone who is deeply threatened by it.
Very much. Yeah, they don't like any of this. Someone who's narcissistic or manipulative hates everything that we're talking about right now.
Exactly. Tell the viewers, the listeners, tell us about this book that you wrote about boundaries and how it can be helpful to the person who is struggling to be a healthy boundaried person or wants to be.
Well, I appreciate it, Ross. So this is the book, The Courage to Set Healthy Boundaries on Amazon. I have audio, Kindle, and paperback. And the subtitle is Stand Strong in Your Truth,
Yeah.
Feel Whole and Respected. I wanted to write this because all the folks that I work with, I'm talking about boundaries with them all the time. And
Yeah.
what I was really in 25 years, what I've come to understand is that so many people are confused about boundaries. And so
Yes.
the book starts out at a basic level, just kind of, describing this is what they are, this is what they aren't, basically helping to understand where you end and the other person begins
Right.
and having that interior sense.
What I like about this book, in fact, what I was enthralled about was it, like all of your books, you have these really interesting explanations that trace back the origins of the problems, but you are really hands-on and prescriptive. You talk about what to do, how to do it, you create exercises, you break it down into increments or chunks of an exercise that you can do and try. And tell the listeners, the viewers, more about how they can use the book to grow and to become the healthy, boundaried person that they deserve.
What I find is that when I'm in session with someone and I'm having them read the book, what I get back from them in real time is when they get about halfway through the book. So I've taken them through kind of understanding the basics of boundaries, what they are, what they aren't. I'm taking them through boundary language. This is how you
Yeah.
can say certain things, because a lot of people kind of get hung up on, I don't know how to say it. I just write out, okay, this is how you would say things in this situation. And then I have different example stories that I relate of how people have struggled with boundaries and what that caused in their relationships. But I find when they get about halfway through the book, they're starting to really then embody boundaries,
Hmm.
because what's happening is they're now able to observe in their life
Right.
where others respect them and when they don't respect them. They're observing, gosh, I really need to say this to this person because they're not getting what I need and they keep on invalidating me. That's probably the biggest thing that I see is that folks begin to observe in their life and really say, okay, I'm seeing where I need to bring in these boundaries. And I
Right.
take them through different exercises of understanding their relationships. So I have them
Mm,
go through a circle exercise, who's in your inner circle, who is in your outer circles.
right.
And then basically, who do you feel safe with? Who do you
Right.
feel you need to set better boundaries with, and identifying those interactions. But a lot of folks are drifting through life hoping that others will read their mind.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be
Right?
good, huh?
Right. So they're hoping that someone else can read my mind so I don't have to set a boundary. But that's really opening ourselves up to a lot of misinterpretation and a lot of projection from the other person putting onto us what they think we need.
Your books build upon each other. Your first couple books are about trauma and about, exploration and healing. And this book, and then there's one on grief. And when I'm finished, you'll listen for our listeners and viewers. But this one builds nicely upon all of the other books that you have written, sets them up, prepares them to learn about boundaries are life. Boundaries are happiness. Boundaries are sadness. If you can't set a boundary because of what is deficient in yourself, what's underdeveloped, or with who you are, it says a lot about the quality of your life. And so I'm glad that you're able to, through your work, help people move in the direction of healing, connecting trauma, connecting grief, and now learning the importance of exercising their self through boundaries. Your stuff is great. And I hope my listeners and viewers will look more at your stuff. And if they haven't heard about my book, The Human Magnet Syndrome and the Codependency Revolution, and my upcoming workbook on both of them, it talks about more of the focused angle of being the codependent or someone who's self-love deficient and being in a relationship with a pathological narcissist, and why these topics, boundaries especially, are so challenging. So they go well together, which is probably why we get along so well
Right.
together.
They go well together exactly because you're talking about the attraction between the
Yeah,
narcissist and someone with self-love deficit disorder. This is why that keeps on perpetuating
right.
is the lack of boundaries, the lack of this self-belief. It really is about learning boundaries is helping you become the person you really needed for yourself when you were growing up.
That's wonderfully said. I think George Eliot, and I always mess up saying, it's never too late to become the person you should have been. If we didn't learn boundaries because our parents didn't learn them, they were well-meaning, they weren't, mean, nasty, harmful people, but they
Right.
themselves grew up in an environment that didn't pass on that experience and that learning. We can become the very best of ourselves, or if we come from a trauma and we are in this healing process, we can then take those healed wounds and become the person that we always believed we could be, and find people that respect and want to know our boundaries and learn about them.
hmm And I want to tell everyone who's listening and watching that the authentic person inside of you is ready to come forth. Work through these books that Ross and I have created. Work with a therapist. You do not have to live in this pain. You don't have to
Right.
live in this diminished idea of yourself, that you can
Yeah.
be full size.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I had this really, really intense, deep session with a client just yesterday, and I kind of brought him back to his original trauma that
Mhm.
until that discussion, he didn't connect it to his wife. And he was able to say, this was when I quit being authentic.
Yes.
And I get goosebumps because the term authenticity, authentic, was such a powerful word in understanding his trauma. And then the loss of who he should and could have been. So
Yeah.
again, Bob, thank you for coming up with this idea for another discussion. And gosh, I could just do it because I enjoy it, but I hope our viewers or our listeners can learn more about their right to be seen, heard, and respected through boundaries and setting them and having them respected.
I appreciate it. You asked earlier about my different books. This is Healing Your Lost Inner Child. This will help you understand your inner child wounding and how most of us bring that into our adult life. I have 110,000 readers all over the world. This book is translated into 12 languages now.
Whoa,
So this is,
impressive.
yeah. And then my relationship book helps us understand healing your wounded relationship, helps us understand how our childhood wounding impacts how we choose our partners in life or our friends in life. And so it's the origin story of our bad picker,
As I say in my Human Magnet Center, our broken picker.
our broken
Yes.
picker. And then my grief book, The Tender Path of Grief and Loss.
Yeah.
And the grief and loss book is all sorts of losses, not just death, but all sorts of
Yeah.
loss. And then there's a workbook for the first book, the companion workbook for Healing Your Lost Inner Child. So these are all my book babies.
When you came out with your first book, that baby, that just went like wildfire because you speak the language that people understand and people get. And so thank you for your contributions and your dedication.
Thank you.
Okay, Bob. Well, I'm going to call this one a wrap. Thanks again because this was a
Thank
lot
you.
of fun.
It's always a pleasure. We always have interesting and lively discussions.
And I want to remind folks that my self-love mailbag, please, the comment section of this video, write a question that I will then in a video answer. And because this video was so spontaneous, I didn't get to that. In my next coming video, count on me addressing some of the questions you've sent. Okay? You all be well, be safe, and never forget, it's never too late to be the person you should have been.